Lisa Taddeo is the author of the New York Times bestseller, Three Women. She has contributed to the New York Times, Esquire, and many other publications. Her nonfiction has been included in the anthologies Best American Political Writing and Best American Sports Writing, and her short stories have won 2 Pushcart prizes. Tonight, she will be in conversation with Claire Dederer. Claire is the author of 2 critically acclaimed memoirs, Love and Trouble, A Midlife Reckoning, and Poser, My Life in 23 Yoga Poses, which was also a New York Times bestseller. She's a book critic, an essayist, a reporter, and a long-time contributor to the New York Times, and has also written for The Atlantic, Vogue, and New York Magazine, among other publications. We would also like you to purchase Claire's book if you'd be so inclined. We will have a link in the chat box for both her titles as well. So without further ado, I'm going to leave it to Claire and Lisa to chat. We'll come back and talk about bring in audience questions, probably at about 7:45. So without further ado, here we go.
Thank you so much, Patty.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. I'll get things rolling since I'm the interlocutor for this amazing book. I'm going to start just by going back in time a little bit and to July 6th, 2019. We were waiting to start the reading, I went back and looked at my Instagram post for Three Women. Because I remember picking up the book and nobody knew anything about it. Lisa was a debut author, and I had just posted something about it and described it as a glorious, delicious beast of a book. And then I was lucky enough to get to talk with Lisa about Three Women, I think the week it published. Mm-hmm. And I could feel, I don't want to have this be all about my own purse capacity or whatever word I'm trying to use there, but I could feel something was about to happen. And it was really a thrill to get to talk to you, but then to see the way that the book was picked up and the way people responded to it, which I thought they would. The book was, written on all themes that are of primal interest to me about femininity and feminism and sexuality and obsession. What is so exciting, I love that I described that book as a beast because now we have an animal. And this book takes a lot of those same sort of themes that Lisa was tossing up in the air, and she sort of pulls them all together and just turns them into this fireball. And so I just wanted to acknowledge kind of a through line between the 2 books, but our conversation is going to really focus on animals. So Lisa, I wondered if you wanted to start by reading or just wanted to begin with chatting.
I like chatting.
Okay.
That's okay with you.
Yeah, it's totally fine. I had something I was going to ask you to read, but I won't.
I will. No. If you have something you want me to read, I will read it.
I was hoping you would read just a little bit, the first page of chapter 2 so that's in the galley, that's page 7, to the words sociopath on the top of page 8. Are you able to find that? I could have told you this before.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it. No, as long as someone has, if you ask me to do it, I will do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If someone asked me to describe myself in a single word, depraved is the one I would use. The deprivation has been useful to me. Useful to what end, I couldn't say. But I have survived the worst. Survivor is the second word I'd use. A dark death thing happened to me when I was a child. I will tell you all about it, but first I want to tell what followed the evening that changed the course of my life. I'll do it this way so that you may withhold your sympathy, or maybe you won't have any sympathy at all. That's fine with me. What's more important is dispelling several misconceptions about women mostly. I don't want you to continue the cycle of hate. I've been called a whore. I've been judged not only by the things I've done unto others, but cruelly by the things that have happened to me. I envied the people who judged me, those who lived their lives in a neat, predictable manner. The right college, the right house, the right time to move to a bigger one. The prescribed number of children, which sometimes is 2 and other times is 3. I would bet that most of those people had not been through 1% of what I had. But what made me lose my mind was when those people called me a sociopath. Some even said it like it was a positive. I am someone who believes she knows which people should be dead and which should be alive. I am a lot of things, but I am not a sociopath.
Thanks for reading. So is she?
You know, I don't think so. No, I think that, you know, what I was so interested in with Animal, and this is one of the kernels that sort of kicked off the ideas for me. But do you know the astronaut who found out her partner was cheating on her and drove across the country wearing a diaper?
Right.
You know, with like stuff in the back to like kill either him or the woman he was having the affair with. And to me, you know, I think the first thing that people say when they hear that story is like, oh my God, you know, like what a psycho, right? Mm-hmm. And like you can say whatever you want about the morals of it. You know, is it right? No. But the idea of the woman wearing a diaper, you know, I found so absolutely poignant, because it's like, if you're that angry and that upset and that, you know, if somebody has just turned your entire life upside down, you don't want to stop to pee. You know, and that doesn't make you crazy. It just makes you have propulsion and forward motion. It makes you, you know, kind of efficacious, I think. So I was interested in that. And to those ends, I do not think that that Joan is a sociopath. I think that there are a constellation of events that have happened that have sort of, you know, turned her into this galaxy that she's become, but each of them are very discernible points on a map.
Yeah, I want to return to this problem of who's crazy and who's not, and whether or not craziness is caused or is something we're all just sucking in through the ambient air of what we have to live in. But, I really loved opening with that assertion that she's not a sociopath. I just thought that was a really nice, even masterful note of, you know, a doth protesting too much, where we really, as a reader, we automatically are in this sort of uncomfortable position with the narrator, where we are definitely going to stay for the whole book. Though I found her strangely, deeply sympathetic. Before we get back into the madness piece, I was wondering if you could just start by talking about the history of the book. And you know, did that image of the astronaut, was that a kernel? Was that causal, or was it just sort of something that illustrates something you were interested in exploring?
It was more so the latter, something that illustrated something that I was interested in exploring. Because I obviously will not be able to think of them now if asked, but there are so many moments in my life. And there is something that Joan says in the book too, where it's like, you know, whenever someone does something terrible, people are like, but why would you do that? And Joan says she knows exactly why someone would do something. And you know, it's funny because whenever my 6-year-old daughter does something horrid, like, you know, loses my mother's wedding ring or something, I'll be like, why did you do that? And my husband's like, why are you asking a 6-year-old why she did that? And I'm like, I don't know. And so for it's similar for me with Joan. It's like, you know, she doesn't need to ask the question, because there are these, you know, just much like with my 6-year-old, she did it because she didn't know that it was important, and because she has a 6-year-old's brain and is not, you know, is not thinking about whatever. And the same thing is true of people who are in dire situations. I think Joan comes from a very haunting past, and the things that happened to Joan, the things that happened to many of us when we're young, are, you know, just really, they kind of ink what's going to happen in our future and how we're going to eventually one day maybe explode. And I was really interested in the idea of memory with this book, and the idea of how memory sits and eventually kind of like expands and, you know, just sort of soaks everything. After a while, you don't even really notice it's doing it.
Yeah, I think that I was really interested in how the book is, just for people who haven't read the book, this woman, she's clearly very damaged. She's on some kind of hell-bent mission to do something, but we don't know what. Do you think that's fair to I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah, no, that's great.
And so the book is heavily plotted. Like there's a lot of plot in this book, which is really pleasurable for the reader, right? I mean, it's very, you use the word propulsion yourself, and there's a lot of propulsion to this book. That's a propulsive book. And a lot of the plot is very bloody or dramatic. I don't think I'm giving anything away. I think that's all implied at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask about, you're a writer who, one of the things I really love about your work, and I really loved it in Three Women, and I actually think it really carries through to this book, is the way that you are driven by ideas. You're really animated by certain ideas, but then in Three Women, and then again here, you sort of let stories take on a life of their own, and kind of the elements of the ideas get explored through story and through action. Mm-hmm. So in Three Women, you're not always big-footing in to tell us what everything means. You're more arranging the material and standing back and letting people draw their own conclusions, which is clearly what good fiction does. And this work is so heavily plotted. And so I was wondering if there's a way in which the intense dramatics of the book are almost meant as, are they almost like metaphorical? Like why I have this question, what made you decide to write a bloody book rather than, a achieverish depiction of quiet despair? Right? Like why all the blood?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that, for me, one of the things that Animal is a depiction of for me is a sense of grief and loneliness. For me, a lot of the reasons why I connected with people during Three Women, and a lot of the reasons why people spoke to me at length and deeply was because I had a lot of loss and grief in my life. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes it is, and at a fairly young age, when you are struck in those sorts of ways, and then your contemporaries don't have the same experiences, it's kind of hard to communicate how bad something can be. So in a way, I lost both my parents, not in the way that Joan quite wildly loses hers. But for me, it felt like, I was being like mauled to death by a tiger, and people were coming to see me and they were like, oh, we can just give her Band-Aids and stuff because it's just, she lost her parents. I don't exactly know what that's like, but, she'll be okay in a couple of weeks, when really I was completely reshaped by those losses. So in Animal, the blood is kind of like, this is how Joan feels. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you need to go to that sort of gothic area to describe what normal pain feels like, what to other people looks like something that you could get over in a couple of weeks or months.
Well, and she talks about that dissociation from other people's pain and how difficult it is to understand another person's pain. Yeah. And in a way, like the centrality of Joan's pain, there's a way in which it implies all the other characters having that same anguish, but she can't see past her own.
Yeah.
Yeah. So was this written, is this a book that you've been working on for a while, or was it something that came out of Three Women, or?
I wrote it during my last year of researching Three Women. I had gone to, I was living in Boston talking to one of the women, kind of finishing up the story, etc. And I went to get my MFA in fiction at Boston University, and Animal was like the first 80 pages or so were my thesis statement. So I wrote it at the tail end of sort of waiting for Three Women stuff to culminate.
Gotcha. Because it's definitely one of the things that's really, it's a weirdly fun book, given the darkness of the material. And it is cultural critique. Like there's a lot of cultural critique here. There's a lot of, obviously, this is a book about a feminist or a female rampage. So there's kind of there's a gender critique that's happening here that we'll continue to talk about. But there's also, it's a book that's set in New York and Los Angeles and deals a lot with class and consumption in both those places. And a lot of the cultural critique is very funny. Like the sort of the dumb, lovable young guy who says he's practicing stoicism in between mining Bitcoin. That was so good. So I was really curious about when it was written, because it had this quality of having been worked on for a long time. Like it's a very finished, you know, you really explored every aspect of the character and there's a lot of plot, but then there's these things that are super of the moment. So I was sort of curious about the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much, I probably wrote it in 2018 and then, you know, did some editing, obviously in the past, you know, year or so.
And had you lived in LA when you wrote it, or?
I wasn't, I had lived in LA, but I was writing this in Boston. So I had lived in Topanga Canyon, where much of the book is set. That was one of the places I lived in LA. And it was just such a wild sort of hellscape, of a beautiful hellscape. But I was so enchanted with it and also scared of it. I mean, have you ever been to Topanga Canyon? Yeah. You know, the drives, like I mean, I went there a couple of weeks ago to do some work trips. And one of the things I did was do this profile with the LA Times, and the photographer and I went to the top of the canyon, and I drove up those streets, and there was a fire starting in Pacific Palisades right in that moment, but we kind of got stuck up there, sort of. And I was just like, I could not believe that I had driven home night after night, up those like wild breakneck mountain turns.
Have you read Golden Days by Carolyn C?
No, I've never even heard of it. I'm going to write it down though.
I'll send you a note. It's incredible. It was written, I think, in the early 70s, and it also is set in Topanga, and it's also a dystopian apocalyptic novel about a woman in her 30s or 40s. In this case, she's kind of trying to navigate the sexual revolution, but she's also hoarding gems because those are the only things she's convinced that's going to see her through the apocalypse, which in fact comes. And it's sort of the great lost California novel. And it's kind of it's got some twinship with this book.
Oh, wow. I can't wait. The only book that I had ever, and I haven't read that book, but the only one that I knew of that I didn't read was The Tortilla Curtain by T.C. Boyle.
I haven't read that one.
I know that's set in Topanga, but when I like found Topanga, because I didn't know what Topanga was until I was in LA and living there. When I found Topanga, I was just like, I can't believe this hasn't been written about, you know, like a million times. It's just like there's so much that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was really interested in there's an aspect of the book where the character is sort of surrounded by sexual menace is the kind of feeling of the book. And she even sort of becomes surrounded by historical sexual menace in this really interesting way. There's sexual menace that had happened probably even before she was born in California that becomes a plot point in the book. And so there's like these kind of orgies that end up being a plot point. And I was curious if that was something that you had researched history on, or you invented out of whole cloth, or how much LA history informed this actual writing?
It was Sandstone was a real place in Topanga Canyon that I had known about. And I drove past it. You know, this was when I was living there researching some people for Three Women in LA proper, but I drove to Sandstone. I think that was before I had moved to Topanga, to see like what it looked like, and it was kind of, you know, boarded up, sort of. You couldn't really see the house in the background, but it was a real place. But the stuff that happens in the book is fictionalized, but it was a real place.
The details from that were so good. I mean, there's a way in which, can I just give one detail away?
Yeah, sure.
There's this thing about there's a cow skin trampoline. Am I right?
Yeah.
And women bounce on it naked and the men watch. And there's just something about that is just so everything disgusting about Southern California and the sexual revolution. It's just a perfect detail. You capture so much. I mean, it does, the book is this kind of, you use the word hellscape, and there is this way in which we're trapped in Joan's obsessive brain. Mm-hmm. And it's this hellscape of her trying to navigate the world, you know, despite everything that's happened to her, and somehow desperately acting out of her own pain, but also in a weird way trying to right wrongs. And so it's really locked into her point of view. But as I said earlier, there's a lot of cultural observation. And I think that, you know, so including that stuff about Topanga in the 70s and now, conversely, there's a lot of stuff about luxury and wealth. Mm-hmm. And Joan is really interesting because she's not just fluid in her class position, she's like liquid. She's moving around in class positionality all the time. And I thought that you got really at this really interesting idea about luxury and sexuality being intertwined, mm-hmm. and how women's sexuality is collapsed with the exchange of luxury goods.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about how that came to be in the book? And
yeah, I mean, it was important to me to have, for part of Joan wants, you know, like we all do, love and kind of safety, or maybe not safety exactly, but certainly to feel secure in being cared for in some way. But I also wanted her to want a lot of things, and to at the same time recognize the kind of ridiculousness that comes from wanting. And I'm also really interested, you know, I mean, I think there's always haves and have-nots, right? Mm-hmm. I'm interested in the people who are have-nots, but who understand all the haves.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's an interesting context. And I think that what's remarkable to me about our country, you know, in so many countries, but certainly with ours and so many of the places I've lived, you know, you have a beautiful enclave, and then 2 miles down the road, you have, you know, like people really struggling to live. And I think that the coming together of those two things within Joan herself, mm-hmm. You know, the idea of at various times in her life having had the money to have beautiful things, and then at other times being completely not knowing, you know, if she's going to be able to put gas in her car. That sort of living on that edge is so striking to me and interesting. And I think when it comes to women's beauty and sexuality, it's like, you know, there were two kinds of beauty that Joan could aspire to be, either like the sort of, you know, sexual, sensual creature that doesn't require being dressed in any particular way. But then she also knew that there was a value to being perfectly adorned on top of her sensuality, that would give her a mark of elegance that might keep her out of some elements of sexual threat, because usually women who are poorer are targeted. So I think, and because she had been targeted so much and groomed so much, she has a real understanding of that, and that's part of why she wants money and sort of, you know, that safety that comes from fiscal comfort, because she feels like that protects her from some of the sexual threat as well.
Yeah, that was sort of how I read it, was that there's this really interesting high-low, which I've actually seen with people I've known who've been kind of marginal, or like maybe drug abusers or something, where there's some consumption of luxury goods and then some just total instability.
Yeah.
And yet somehow this inability to stay in the middle. And I thought the sort of dropping away of the middle class in Joan's life reflected the dropping away of safety, family, all these different, and the money stuff I thought was just absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
Oh, well, sure. I guess I was hoping, do you want to make a statement about women?
A blank statement?
Well, yeah, I just think, I think what this book is, it's so interesting, is she's so enraged. And by the end of the book, you sort of come to feel really sympathetic to her rage. Mm-hmm. But she's not just a victim. She's a participant in her own diminishment a lot of times. And you kind of get at that problem of consent being so much closer to lack of consent than we like to really acknowledge. Even so, and I thought that was really nuanced and well done. And even so, we do start to really believe in her rage by the end. And I guess one question I had is, and you talk a lot about how rape, in the book, you talk about how rape happens all the time and that there's these little rapes that occur. And I mean, when in the 80s, when I was in college, we called that the rape spectrum. I don't know if they still use that phrase. Or the rape continuum, excuse me. So I guess it's really interesting to think about Joan's rage being traceable to a specific event. And it's like, is there a way in which that event is a stand-in for this, like, this sort of mire of rape that we're all in all the time? Like what's the causality there from a novelist point of view?
From what I think is, I think that for Joan and for a lot of women, and certainly for myself, I think that the sort of assaults, be they emotional or physical, that I have been complicit in, and by complicit I mean, like, just in any way not pushing it off, in any even sustan of allowing it. Those are the ones that feel the most horrific to me, because I have been part of it. I've been party to it. My own emotional weakness has allowed for, physical or more emotional weakness. And I find that to be so interesting. And in Joan's situation, the things that she felt that she was complicit in, or the things that she didn't put a stop to in a certain way, affect her much harsher than the ones that she wasn't affected by, that she was not complicit in, that she did not allow to happen, but that just happened to her when she was either too young or too whatever. So I'm very interested in that sort of in the way that we, I think there's a line where Joan says there's these, or, I think maybe Alice, the woman that becomes very important to her, says it, that there's these rapes that we shower for, in a sense.
That was a great line.
Obviously, I don't mean that that's but at the same time, it's there's such a history of women that obviously just in the past couple of years has come to the surface, but there's a long history of us just feeling like we need to go with the flow of certain things, and be cool and be permissible and be open and understand the nature of other people. And I think that that those things that we do to ourselves are the things that we punish other women for the most, because we don't like to see it. We don't like to see each other sort of being weak. And we struggle to remember the times that we have felt weak ourselves and done the same thing ourselves. So I was very interested in kind of trying to crack that open as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that there's a really amazing passage in the center of the book, kind of right in the middle, where Alice starts to provide that pushback. Alice, who's the main character's friend and sort of another object of her obsession, because she starts to push back against Joan's idea, not of her victimization, but just that, of just sort of her role in all these situations. In some cases, Alice is saying she has been victimized, and in other cases, she just gets frustrated with Joan staying stuck in this dynamic that she's been in with men. And so you can see, even though Alice sees Joan as victimized, Alice has to bail because she can't tolerate it.
Yeah. And that's something that I think is really, it's something I saw a lot after Three Women, people saying that some of the women in the book were pathetic for victims. And I think that, and I always bring up, Sex and the City and Carrie and Miranda's relationship in specific, when Carrie can't quit big.
Right.
And Miranda's like, I'm done listening about him. And I always find that so striking because, I find it to be, there's nothing sort of colder and harder we can do to another person than say, like, we're done listening to your obsession, as though, you know, you're upset, as though the other person's obsession is like, if we really understood how hard other people were falling for things, you know, in those moments, we just don't, it makes us all, I think, feel more powerful to be like, oh, I don't have a problem with that. Oh God. You know, and if we are able to stand, in order to be up here, sometimes we need to stand on other people's shoulders. And that's something I think we do with female vulnerability and sexuality all the time to one another. And that's something I really wanted to look at with Alice and Joan.
Yeah, I agree. I was just going to use the phrase high horse, right? Like, it's this idea of being up above. And I think that that's a real, what you're describing is this range of attitudes about complicity, about consent, you know, how we put ourselves in victimized situations that we're maybe consenting to, but that there's this range of experiences that sort of reflects what we were talking about earlier, which is this idea of this range of violations. There's Sarah Hepola has written about this really interesting in Blackout. If you've read that, it's her book about problem drinking. About drinking. It's about quitting drinking, but it's more than that. It's about blacking out. And she talks about this notion of drinking to consent. And it's something, it falls into the category of what you're talking about. It's a subject matter we're uncomfortable with. Yeah. There's consent or there's not consent.
Right.
So when you step into these waters of making the main character complicit in her own victimization, you really run the risk of having people hate your character.
Yeah, it's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah,
I find it so shocking. That and thank you, and you just said it so eloquently and really just, I mean, it just nails it. It's so shocking to me that people are like, oh, how could she have done that? And it's like, have you never done? I just don't believe you that you haven't done stuff like, you know, like, I just don't. I think that, you know, I just think that the idea of running that risk, and I knew it was a risk, you know, and I understood it, but I also, at the same time that I understood it was a risk, it's like, for me, it was just it's such a real, true thing that so many of us do, you know. I speak to so many people who, like, you know, repented former obsessives who are like, I don't know, you know, maybe, you know, they're married now or they're whatever, and they're like, I don't know, I'd probably do the same thing all over again because there's there's an addictive quality to that. Love can be an addiction like any other, and not just love, but all the things that are wrapped up with love, the idea of safety, the idea of feeling actualized and someone care, you know, like, I'm a worthy person, like Maggie in my book felt loved and made actual and whole by her teacher, and it's not pathetic to get that feeling and to keep wanting it, you know, just like it's not pathetic to have, you know, a problem with alcohol, or it's just the idea of the word pathetic for people who we each have our faults and flaws and addictions in all different places because we've been fucked up by our parents, you know, and we're going to keep doing it and it's just going to keep happening. The only thing we can do is to be as, you know, as sort of open and generous to other people making mistakes as possible.
Right. I mean, that was very much my MO in writing my second memoir, Love and Trouble, was like this quality of obsession and like this problem around sexuality and being a sexual person and how does it interlock with one's own victimization. Those were all things that I really saw people feeling. They weren't even talking about them, let alone writing about them, but I saw them feeling them. And I knew in writing about that I was going to be an unlikable narrator. And I was excited to do that after having written one book with a very likable narrator. But it's interesting because I remember talking with a group of women writers over a weekend a couple of years ago, like, we don't get to have the anti-hero. We don't get to have the unlikable woman narrator who's cool. We don't get to have the asshole Don Draper. right?
Yep.
We get to have a woman who's struggling with her own victimization. And that's, you know, this is not a book about a girl boss who goes out and murders people. This is not that book. It's a book about a person working through her own victimization. And I just don't know if you can create a female antihero who kind of doesn't encompass that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
You know, I mean, one of the books that is a huge influence for me is Natalia Ginsburg's The Dry Heart.
Mm-hmm.
Read that?
Yeah.
You know, and and also another one that I also go back to all the time is Elena Ferrante's Lost Daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another anti-hero because the woman leaves her kids, her two daughters, for 2 years or so. And then sort of like she leaves for her. It's not really talked about too much why, but and then I have another writer friend who writes very, you know, books that everybody loves, but the one book that she wrote that did the only book that didn't do well was a book she wrote about a quote unquote bad mother who.
It's always the mother.
Always, it's that thing. It's, you know, and it's that feeling of like, we just do not want, we're like, no, we can't hear it. But men can go off and leave, you know. I like thinking about like, is it Legends of the Fall? It's like Brad Pitt goes off onto the boat and it's like, you know, he's just
every
like,
rock musician ever.
It's like they go off and they have to do these crazy things all by themselves and then they come back and then you have to, you know, even what's his name in The Wrestler, you know, it's that same thing. It's like, oh, well, he had to do it. We just look at that guy and we're like, oh, I hope his daughter starts talking to him again. And
right. I know. Like, I think of Gauguin. Like, Gauguin got on a boat and flew and sailed to Tahiti and wrote a letter to his wife in which he said, I am a great artist. Yeah. Right. And that's the important part of the story is off he goes.
Exactly.
Yeah. You know, we were talking before we began here about, I'm working on this book about bad people who make great art, or what do we do with the art of monstrous men, which is something that I've written on before, but I'm just finishing a book on this subject. And the question, you know, people kind of come up to you when they find out that's your subject matter and like, they're going to catch you out. They say, well, are you writing about any women? Yeah. Like you're going to be found out being a feminist or something. Like, what women are you writing about? And it's fascinating because the only truly women who are really perceived as monstrous is child abandoners. Like that is the female crime. If rape is the male crime, you know, it's just the child abandonment is the female crime.
Exactly. And it's abandonment, just even like, you know, I'm going to the spa today. It's like, oh, I mean, it's not quite, you know, it's just, it's, and I think it's something we've seen so much with the pandemic, you know, how women have done, you know,
it's horrifying.
And we all knew it. I mean, it's not like it's like new information, and it's not everybody, and it's not, you know, but it's so many that, you know, there was this amazing article in Time about women, you know, in the workforce and what happened with the pandemic. And it's just, there's so much there. But for me, it's that women do it so much to other women. It's that is the real crime for me that I think is that needs to be changed.
I'm going to release you to your questioners in the audience, but before I do that, I do want to just ask you to talk. I have this one question and it's very specific, but just the nature of obsession. I think one of the reasons this book is so good is that it's just as we were talking about consent and victimization, your view of obsession is made complex or is complicated by the fact that one of the most damaging obsessions in the book is experienced by a man. Mm-hmm. So everybody in this book is just like going around obsessing about each other. And I was wondering if you could talk about, are there ways in which obsession can be gendered? Is there male obsession versus female obsession? Or did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I think male obsession tends to feel, and I don't like to generalize, but, you know, yes, of course, there's the, you know, we do have things that separate us by gender occasionally. And I think that male obsession is generally more entitled. not even by the men themselves, but other people are like, oh, well, oh God, he really wanted her. Like, women wanting is a much different, uglier thing. Men wanting, men raging for what they want, men going after it is like them going with like spears into like battle and just taking what is theirs, you know? And then with women, you know, they go after what they want, and it's like, oh my God, it's like an unsavory thing sometimes. I think with women, there's an element to, you have enough, you know, you have a husband, two kids, and that you have XYZ, you know, you don't need any, what more do you want? There's still that. And, you know, it's okay that it's there, because we've been living in, you know, with this sort of society of it for so long. But it's okay if it's there, but it's not okay to kind of keep like looking at it and, you know, keep kicking people down. So I find obsession, obviously, I mean, I think obsession is so interesting to talk about, to write about, less so to feel. But it's
boring to feel.
It's very, yes, it's mind numbing to feel, but after, you know, to write about it and talk about it, to think about it. I mean, whenever my friends, you know, my friends who are single, who have new loves in their lives, I mean, that's the most exciting stuff to talk about. You know, it's more exciting than talking with your married friends about what each other's kids are doing. I mean, it's great. I like to do it all, but I'm like, oh my God, and then what happened next? And that's how it was for me with Three Women. It was just this constant, like, being so intrigued, you know, by people's desires and sex lives and the things that made them crazy. But one of the prime obsessions in Animal is a man's obsession for Joan, and sort of the way that it makes Joan, which I don't think men do as often. Joan felt like she had to nurture it and keep it in a safe spot. Mm-hmm. And I think that when a woman is obsessed with a man and he is not interested, he doesn't nurture it. He kind of just lets it grow like a weed, and it's a different thing. And that's why women, I think, have this feeling of complicity sometimes. And it's just kind of we have this caretaking, more nurturing biological vibe. So if someone loves us, we're not going to be like, you know, not text them back for
right.
several months.
There was a real humanity or humanism in the way that you got at how all the obsession in the book is about the void and about what the character lacks. It's about the lack. And there was a real empathy in that, I thought. That you found that core or that void in all the characters. Like, of course, that's the part I like, but that you allowed every person their own howling void. And that, you know, that's generous when the men, you know, to do that to characters who aren't automatically likable. Yeah. So I really loved that.
Thank you.
All right, should we bring Patty in? Because I want to leave time for audience Q&A. I don't know.
Hi, Patty.
Worked.
Wow, this could go on. This is so wonderful. Really, really wonderful conversation. We do have some questions. One of my questions, actually, because I've done a little research before you got on tonight. So you've done nonfiction, you've done fiction now. How about a memoir? It does sound like I've read a little bit about your past and the loss that you have. Is some of the book a little autobiographical? Is it not?
I mean, the law. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean.
Is a memoir in your future?
Yeah. Memoirs. I don't know if memoir is probably the right word, but I'm working on a book about grief, not just my own, but it'll be reported about other people. It'll be somewhat like, you know, Three Women, in the sense that I will be talking to people, hopefully in as great depth, but also relating my own loss as well.
Okay, and now that we're on the topic of Three Women, we did speak a little bit before we started tonight. What's happening with Three Women? Is it going to be a film? Is it going to stream?
It is to be a series on Showtime.
Okay.
And we are currently talking to cast and directors as we not exactly as we speak, but right after we speak. and prior. So we're in the fun sort of stage. We've written 10 episodes, and we are hoping to shoot it in the fall.
Wow.
And you're involved in the writing. How's that going?
Good. I mean, it's done. It's done.
So good that it's done.
I know. Now that it's done, I'm like, oh, that wasn't so bad.
Do you feel like you were true to your voice? That's true to the book? Do you?
I had I had a really great team. Also, I had Laura Easton as the showrunner. She's a very amazing playwright, and also worked in TV on House of Cards and The Loudest Voice in the Room, and many other things. And she's been great. And there were 2 other writers as well, and my husband. And so we had a small little group. But it was really great, and we just kind of all brought something to the table. Right.
Okay. There was a question that popped up. You recently talked about women not supporting other women. I've been a victim of this behavior twice, once years ago as a breastfeeding mother, and just recently in the workplace. What advice can you give to other women on how we should eliminate this behavior?
Oh God. I mean, I think that I think that the more we listen to one another, and the more we I think the biggest thing is excavating why you would be unkind to someone, specifically, someone who's trying to legitimately just feed a human being. I mean, that sounds horrid. I think that, I often think the times in my life when I've been angry, or the times in my life that I've seen other people be angry, you often, if you just try to get, or someone just being rude, if you try to look at what perhaps where the person is coming from in that moment, I always find it so I think it's one of the most beautiful lines in celebrity media responses, and from several years ago, I think Perez Hilton was like making fun of Jennifer Aniston, and sometime after the breakup, and when he was with Angelina Jolie, and she said she saw him in like a parking lot in Hollywood or something, and she was like, "Hey, I was just wondering, why do you have to be so mean?" And he said that the question just like stopped him in his tracks, and he was like, and it kind of changed everything about the way that he covered celebrity culture. And I find that so beautiful, the idea of like just asking someone, what are you angry at? Like, is it really me? Like, is my breastfeeding really pissing you off, or is there something else? Why are you being mean? I think is a really good question.
Wow, it is indeed. And to switch gears a little bit, I know that everybody watching tonight is wondering, both Claire and Lisa, what are you reading? What do you recommend? There's a question from the audience, other books about women rage, if you have other thoughts on that. It's just a great topic. I think a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but I think after reading your book, certainly I'm a little more hungry for it. So on both those, what you're reading sort of for fun, what your nonfiction and fiction. And I did read, Lisa, recently that while you were writing your fiction, you were much more interested or really stuck to nonfiction while you were writing fiction. Could you speak to a little bit about that?
Yeah, I find that it's really, I kind of have ADD when it comes to, I have OCD. I have lots of something D's, but when it comes to reading, I like to read a lot of different things at once. And when I'm writing, I like to take in almost like the antithesis of the kind of thing I'm writing. So I would like to read poetry while writing nonfiction, to sort of remind myself that the nonfiction doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be just the facts. It can be the facts plus more than the facts. So that's what, but in terms of what I am reading, I'm very grateful to have a stack here of things, so I can show you.
Okay.
This is God, I Feel Modern Tonight by Catherine Cohen. It's like some modern poetry that I think is really she's fantastic. She's funny and cool, and Martin Amis, Inside Story. I just got this. I'm really excited about it. I love Martin Amis. Liberty, Caitlin Greenidge. This, I was a judge for the British Book Awards, and this is what we selected as the winner, Diary of a Young Naturalist. It was written, I think he was 15 when he wrote it. This man, Dara McNulty. It's absolutely fantastic. I cannot believe, you won't believe it was written by someone under the age of 40. It's amazing. And then, sorry, there's four more. I just
no, this is great. It's great.
Because it was Shiguro, Clara, and obviously that's, you know, no surprise. Oh, Kevin Barry is one of the best writers, I think, ever. I haven't started this yet, but I love his short stories are among my favorite. Oh, Patricia Lockwood, no one is talking about this. I've only read a little bit of it, but it's got some lines that just blew me away. And George Saunders' Women, the Pond, and the Rain, which I'm halfway, like, I'm
big
really
is this pile, man.
What?
Keep pulling them out.
Thank you. Well, I never have the answer. Usually I'm not in my office meet. We're like sort of like reorganizing the house. So I usually don't have my books around me. And I'm usually like, oh my God, what am I reading? What am I reading? And this time I was just like, oh, I got it, guys. I can go through everything right now.
Lisa, can you show us the book since it came out yesterday, the cover? Just you had a copy, or both, Claire, both of you, so you can just remind
I just have a galley that's been beaten up, gone in the bathtub.
That's okay.
You can see it's a good book by how destroyed it is.
Thank you.
Just want to remind everyone that you get, if you buy a book tonight, or if you're watching our video later on YouTube, you can get a book plate. And Claire, I want to know what you're reading too. And with your book, and when do you imagine we're going to be virtually or in person?
I am finishing revisions on my book right now, so it's not going to be anytime soon, but fortunately people keep being terrible, so it's going to keep being I don't think we're going to run. There is this, every time a story comes out, there is this feeling of like, oh my God, I should have it out right now. But I think it'll be fine. I just read, I realized I have a staff. I just reviewed both of these for the Atlantic, and they were both amazing.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Whereabouts by June Lahiri. Wait, that's this one. And Second Place, which is the latest Rachel Cusk, which is incredible. If you've been reading the Outline trilogy, this book sort of has some of that same voice, but it combines it with some of the more aberrant qualities of her earlier fiction. And both are about, they're not about rage, but they're about women sort of refusing to conform. And both books really powerfully evoke this quality of refusal. And I did think of another book about rage, is The Woman Upstairs by Claire Dederer.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, that's sort of the rage text.
Yeah.
You know, it's yeah. And then the other thing I've been reading a lot of is Barbara Pym, which is interesting to read in the context of rage. I've never, amazingly, given how much I love mid-century British writing, I've never read her. And her characters are these very genteel women, but they're constantly, they just, you know, they're just like vicar's secretaries or whatever, but they have, all the book's dramas are about their boundaries, which is actually kind of about rage. So I'm loving them. I'm just powering through them. So that's what I'm reading.
That's really cool.
Well, this is all terrific. We're coming to a close. Please, I think I read Animal in one day. I mean, I just sat down and read it. It sort of elicits all, it's like looking at an accident. You want to look away, but you want to read it. I mean, and it is so plot driven, and it is so fantastic. So please, buy the book, especially from an independent bookstore, RJ's or any independent bookstore. And Lisa, we're thrilled. I hope the next time you write a book, and Claire, maybe you'll come east and visit us at RJ's. It was a pleasure having a conversation with you women. Congratulations, Lisa. It's terrific.
Thank you. And thank you for that. Phenomenal. Thank you so much for those amazing questions. And thank you for having us at RJ. It's one of my favorite bookstores in the country. Thank you so much.
Come visit. All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.